Thank you so much for having me. My name's Matthew Spoke. Ryan gave you a little bit of who we are. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what the AION Foundation is up to. The AION Foundation is the nonprofit organization that I run that kind of oversees the development of the AION protocol, the coordination and stewardship, I'd say, of the AION network and its participants. And then I'm going to invite up my former co-founder who runs Bicameral Ventures, Kesem Frank, very active participant in our ecosystem that's been investing in a lot of projects that are working with AION as kind of a core underlying infrastructure to give you kind of the perspective of what's going on around the AION protocol as it relates to adoption, as it relates to kind of layer 2 solutions and applications that are being built. So Kesem's going to come share some of his perspectives. So before I jump in, and in fact, I don't know how to change slides because I don't have a slide clicker. How do I? All right. Got it. So before I jump into my actual slides, and I'll jump back just for a sec, I'll give you a quick synopsis of who we are, what we do, and then I'll give you kind of the most recent updates as to our technical roadmap, what we've been working on at the AION Foundation. So quick overview, the AION Foundation is a project that we started in early 2017. We started this out of a company that we were operating in Toronto. Today, the AION Foundation looks quite different. Today, the AION Foundation is, one, a nonprofit, very focused on research and development of this open source protocol. We're about 55 people distributed around 3 offices with another person in a 4th city, but between Toronto, Shanghai, and Barbados. And this team is very much focused on kind of pushing forward the development of this protocol, which was originally very focused on the concepts of interoperability and connecting blockchains, and increasingly focused more and more on solutions around network scaling, opening up better on-ramps and usability for blockchain protocols to developers with some of the work we've been doing with our virtual machine, and more recently work that we've been doing on kind of a novel and new hybrid consensus algorithm that we're running, that we're building to be launched into our network later this year. So I'll give you kind of the 2 most recent updates, and these kind of get boiled down into 2 components that we've been developing at the AION Foundation that will roll into our public network, one over the course of the next couple of weeks and one later on this year. But just background and maybe quick history, the AION network has been live as a public proof of work network running smart contracts and running a concept that we kind of referred to as bridging that would allow essentially token movement between AION and Ethereum. And that's been running since April of last year when we launched our public network and kind of has an active community developing around it. This year, what we've been focusing on is, one, moving our dependency away from Solidity to what we consider a more functional, more familiar, and more robust language towards the Java kind of ecosystem with something we call the AION virtual machine, or the AVM for short. And 2, moving away from a pure proof of work model to increase the stability, security, and overall kind of decentralized scalability of our network with a new consensus algorithm we're developing called Unity. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick update on what these 2 things look like. So first, the AION virtual machine. This is going to be the world's first fully JVM compliant virtual machine that sits on top of a public blockchain, which essentially allows us to kind of interact with a very, very healthy and robust Java ecosystem, but still apply some of the characteristics of blockchains like determinism on top of a public network. So we do this through the AVM. In terms of timeline, the AVM testnet has been live since about January. We've launched this into our public testnet. As of last week, we kind of released the code, and it's forking this week, if I'm not mistaken, into our public testnet. And then it's going to be launched into our mainnet on June 5th will be the public fork date. So this is going to be the net new execution engine of the AION blockchain, meaning that people can still opt to write Solidity applications, but for the first time, it'll be completely available to write fully Java-based JVM-compliant apps on top of the AION public blockchain as of June. And another interesting kind of fact about this is that we're starting to work with other projects about the possibility of integrating AVM as a component into other protocols as well. If you want to learn more about the AVM or how to work with it, we are running a session on Wednesday, an hour-long session about how to build on the AVM, what it means to write Java applications from 1 to 2 o'clock on the construct stage. So why we went with Java, why we went with the JVM. So quickly, we looked at what the current state of the ecosystem was around Solidity. We looked at the development and work being done towards WebAssembly in the Ethereum space, and we landed on Java for a very simple reason that it's got 20 plus years of experience and developer community growing around it. It's the #1 most used developer language and most robust ecosystem of developer tools. So we thought it was going to be a really, really good move to bring more familiarity and adoption in the blockchain industry. So this was kind of the decision that we opted for. That being said, said, we stay very close with our friends in the Ethereum community around WebAssembly and the direction that they're taking that. But we are moving in this direction with Java. Quickly, in terms of what we're doing to make the ecosystem around the AVM more robust, we're working with some of these companies that you see here and a few others not listed yet on building out smart contract templates to essentially say, hey, all the things I would normally have done on Solidity, how do I do them on Java? How do I run a token contract? How do I run a non-fungible token? How do I do multi-sig wallets? We're going to be publishing kind of audited and secure Java smart contract templates to be able to do these functions with some companies that are very familiar to the Ethereum ecosystem, including not listed here, the author of the ERC 721 non-fungible token, who's going to be writing the equivalent on the Java standard, essentially. And we've already built these tools and a few more to come, but essentially integrations into very popular and very common developer tools outside of the blockchain industry. So a big theme for us is moving familiarity and adoption towards engineers in general, not just crypto engineers or Ethereum developers. So we've launched this with Maven, IntelliJ, and Eclipse, 3 of the most popular Java development tools in the world. APIs, without belaboring this, a very large suite of APIs becoming available. Many of these are migrated over from the Ethereum community. We're working with these teams. So a lot of this is us reaching out in the community and saying, who are the best and brightest, working on good tooling, good API, good infrastructure in the Ethereum space, and how can we migrate support over to the AION ecosystem? So we're publishing the AVM with 4 supported APIs, including Web3.js, Ethers.js, which is the most popular Ethereum API today, a mobile API suite being developed by Pocket Network, essentially for Android and iOS developers, and then Web3.j, which is the most popular Java API on Ethereum developed by Web3 Labs. So these are all going to be available along with the launch of the AVM, and many of them are already available today if you want to start testing and building. So you can find out all of this on the AION website or on our GitHub, so feel free to start poking around and interacting with that. So quickly to kind of zoom through proof of Unity consensus, actually we've narrowed this name down to Unity. We just published our white paper on Unity about 2 weeks ago. Unity is essentially a migration for us to move from a proof of work system to what we consider a hybrid system that maintains a function of mining while introducing a function of staking to, 1, improve the security of the network, but also 2, increase the type of interaction that participants in our ecosystem can have with our network. So the white paper has been released. It's on our website. You can view it on GitHub. And the mainnet release is scheduled for Q4 this year with a new economic design behind how this consensus works. Very heavily influenced, shout out to our friends at Decred, heavily influenced by the design behind the Decred blockchain, but with some nuances that we've kind of made adjustments to for support on AION. Unity has kind of been designed with 4 kind of major components in mind. So 1, it needs to improve security. As in a very volatile ecosystem of 51% attacks on proof-of-work networks. 2, increased participation and engagement of AION holders. 3, it's a novel approach that allows us to kind of iterate towards what we consider to be probably a more proof-of-stake future. So we've taken a very iterative design that allows us potentially future flexibility towards another solution. And it continues to balance kind of effectiveness and usability for the end user. So stay tuned. This is going to be available to coin holders probably as of September, October, as a new way to kind of interact with the system and participate in security and earn rewards off of that function as well. So that's all I have. I'm going to invite Kesem up, CEO of Bicameral Ventures, my former partner and co-founder, to tell you a little bit about the ecosystem and what we've been up to, and then I'll be back up for a Q&A.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Kesem Frank. I guess if Matt kind of told you about how everything that AION stands for is getting built and what is it trying to facilitate, I'm here to talk about the what. What is it that we want actually to see materialized on top of the AION network? Let's start by talking about trust. Essentially, we started working with blockchain all the way back in our Deloitte days, Matt and myself, because we understood something that we think is probably trivial to the people in the room, probably not as obvious to people outside of the room. We understand that blockchain essentially solves for 2 components of trust, or 2 layers of trust. There is the very mechanical way that we could think about how do I verify transactions, right? Bitcoin excels at this. But then when you kind of think about what kind of logic can we layer on top blockchains, then it starts becoming very exciting in terms of what else could be, reimagined in terms of current day processes, but working in a completely decentralized without any intermediaries facilitating them. It's a very quick slide, but essentially the point is there is gigantic money for the people that get this right. The way we kind of think about it in the context of Bicameral Ventures is very simple. We kind of look at the current generations of dApps as essentially an attempt to hack together some logic on top of a core infrastructure, on top of whatever blockchain it is, in a way that, to be honest, is pretty clunky. The only way that we're going to be able to mature an ecosystem into something that anyone and everyone can and should use is by essentially creating a fully integrated stack that enables us to go all the way from the infrastructure, through middleware, through layer 2 protocols, all the way to the consumer app. You really need to do that full glacier right and not try to hack together a dApp on top of a blockchain and expect that my mom would be able to use it. The way we think about engagement with companies is pretty much a reflection of that thought. We invest in companies that pretty much operate on every layer of the stack. And it's important. If you don't do it that way, if you focus just on one of these layers, you're going to essentially miss on a crucial layer that makes the whole ecosystem kind of work together. And that's kind of what we try to always have. A very long look and a very broad kind of perspective as to what these companies do and what they mean in the context of an ecosystem. The name itself, Bicameral Ventures, is essentially every domain governed by two chambers of thought. So for us, every one of these companies has to make sense. Phenomenal founders, a great business model, and an ability to execute. But at the same time, they need to make sense in the context of a very mature, a very rapidly evolving ecosystem. Because every time you do it right, every time you introduce one of these layers into the context of the stack, you enrich the environment itself. At the core, it's AION. It's been our go-to engine. It's been the main engine for every investment that we've made in the past 12 months, call it. And it's been phenomenal. And what I want to do with the couple minutes that I have left is just give a few very quick shout outs to companies that I think kind of materialize on this potential. One last point before I go into individual companies is the following notion. When you invest in our approach, something that we come to call the interconnected approach, what you very quickly find out is that every company you introduce into the ecosystem, every company you introduce into the portfolio enriches the entire portfolio. It's very interesting in the context of investment to see how if you take tokens and invest them into a company that does middleware, it actually improves the entire stack of different companies. Because you invested in those companies in tokens as well, they actually end up being better off financially just because you've brought into the fold another company. Very quickly, and then I'll talk about individual companies. The way we think about investment is essentially against two axes. One, there is the complexity of the offer, meaning what needs to be real for a value proposition to be able to materialize itself tomorrow, right? What needs to be built? And this is something that we have had tremendous success collaborating with the AION Foundation on. The second axis, the x-axis there, is time to maturity. Time to maturity from our perspective is when is it that we believe these really big ideas, right? Like self-governed identities and changing paradigms of data ownership, when do we believe they could actually tip a whole market in the sense that consumers demand that these products work in this way, moving away from centrality and into the Web3 future? So that's kind of how we think of the aperture of the opportunities that we're looking for. Very quickly, we have in the room one of the founders of Nodesmith. Nodesmith was just actually elected as one of the top 3 pitches out of the Techstars Seattle cohort. It just concluded last week. What they do is essentially facilitate infrastructure as a service across multiple blockchains to be able to actually unlock this value for developers, people that need to have more streamlined access to blockchains to be able to build the next kind of phases of blockchain applications. Velocia. Velocia does something very phenomenal. Velocia actually created a mobility as a service protocol that allows people to monetize on their own behavior when they're commuting. Velocia just announced a very wide-scale pilot with Miami-Dade. I think it's around 200,000 people that will have access to this technology. It all runs natively on AION, and it's pretty exciting. They were just featured in both Forbes and the World Economic Forum, I think just a couple weeks back. Lastly, Claimplay. Claimplay allows gamers to, it's pretty cool, it allows them to directly monetize on their skill by essentially being paid for what they do best, which is game. Essentially, they treat every game's API as triggers for smart contracts that determine payouts. So if you win or you do a set of actions that they determine valuable, you actually get paid right away by a blockchain transaction straight to your wallet. So these are just a few, I guess, honorable mentions. All these companies are here in the conference. I very much encourage everyone, to the extent of your interest, to look them up. I think that more than what I could tell you or what Matt could tell you, it's really these third parties. It's really these people that had every opportunity and pretty much could have gone with whomever they wanted to build their technology on, but they still chose AION. And I think the most meaningful way that we could communicate what the value of what we're doing is by just putting you in direct touch with these folks. And that's it. That's it for my talk. We're not shy. Please reach out to us. Both myself and my partner, Alex, we're here the entire week. And just shoot us an email if you ever want to follow up. Thank you.
All right. Great presentations, guys. No luck for you today. No easy questions from the audience, so we're going to go right into the speed round with me. So, one of the biggest challenges I think for underlying smart contract platforms is how do they capture value in a network effects game? People tend to shy away from the price of an asset, but when you're talking about a proof of stake system, there has to be some economic value in the token. So, how do you think about your positioning versus Ethereum from a business standpoint and from an application standpoint? Because a couple of maybe the most interesting things that I saw were more technical. It's the Java virtual machine, and then it's this proof of unity, consensus hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system. Is it innovating at the consensus layer, or are there going to be certain applications that just work better on this chain versus Ethereum in particular?
And I mean, by no means is this a slight on Ethereum, because I think we continue to be very big fans of that project and very active members of that ecosystem. But I think the difference is having a go-to-market strategy versus kind of allowing just organic growth to happen accidentally to a certain extent. I think one of the big criticisms that's surrounded the Ethereum project has been that to date it's been kind of the fact of being first that has kind of led them to a lot of the initial traction, initial success. A lot of our focus is to go towards markets that are not yet active in the blockchain industry. So when we think about who our target audience is, it's not going to convince Ethereum developers to kind of pivot their underlying infrastructure. It's to go convince the 99% of engineers out there who haven't yet interacted with the blockchain as to what's the value proposition and how do you view this as part of your stack. And I think at least I differ, I won't speak for Kesem, but I think we're on the same page, is that we see the blockchain evolving more and more as like a microservice to traditional software application stacks, rather than saying, hey, the whole world is moving towards decentralized applications. We're seeing a trend in that direction, but we also see use cases where a traditional software company might see value in integrating a blockchain, a decentralized transaction system, a decentralized component into their software stack, and doing it in a way that's kind of more familiar to them, instead of having to kind of redesign their entire software integration based on a new language, new experience, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have much to add besides this is exactly the kind of things we're hearing from our partners already adapting this technology, so far pretty successfully.
And timing-wise, a lot of our work to date has been getting ready for the launch of this AVM. So I mean, in terms of setting expectations, before AVM launch, which is on our public network on June 5th, it was a debatable trade-off to say, hey, what's the real value add versus like believing in the team, believing in the roadmap, differentiation-wise in terms of like what's the experience I get as a software developer is going to be a lot more pronounced differentiation post-AVM, so post-June 5th. So hopefully that'll start to show.
How do you get those same partners that are going to be, you mentioned go-to-market strategy, which makes a ton of sense if you're trying to steal share. Are you thinking about specific applications? How do you prioritize opportunities? I think I saw a couple of games on the screen for early use cases. EOS has also taken that route where they've prioritized, game makers first, Tron to a certain extent as well. But where can you guys make inroads and develop that thin wedge to get some type of meaningful adoption on this ecosystem and then be able to branch out from those early niche markets potentially?
So I think the beauty of AION is it's a pretty robust yet super broad ecosystem to build a bunch of different stuff on it. If you ask me from a go-to-market perspective, what is it that we think really makes this platform more unique, is probably the fact that it's easier to kind of tie in with big legacy systems. We work with companies that essentially really care about how do I service really big enterprises on top of, I would say an environment that they could understand. Blockchain really, if you kind of architect and you have this diagram of everything, all the moving parts, it's still a very thin layer on top of like a really robust kind of stack that you need to do software right. I don't think it's going to be vertical, at least my opinion. It's not going to be vertical driven. I think it's going to be much more about the approach. What is it that this platform could facilitate to a developer that others probably can't?
Well, if that is the case, then security is a pretty important element of that.
Yep.
You guys have a fairly large community now, at least in terms of market cap of the project. During the transition to a proof of stake system, how do you think about the dispersion of the token? How do you think about concentration and just monitoring the health of that ecosystem? So that it doesn't present a security concern for some of the folks that are building on top.
Yeah, and I think a big part of the design behind Unity was to make sure that we don't end up with some of the unintended consequences that you see in a lot of like delegated proof of stake models where essentially you're recreating a problem of centrality, whether that's like collusion between validators or things like that. So a big part of our design is, we've kind of internally at least coined the term, what does infinite decentralization mean in theory? The fact that there should not be a theoretical limit on the number of validators that can participate in a system where you have systems that revolve around 21 validators or 50 validators. So one, we continue to provide a mining function, so proof of work continues to be the way that the base chain is built. We have this kind of staking functionality that layers security onto blocks before they get approved into the main chain, and that's where the stake comes in. So they both have like a security feature. Our general math today, assuming all else being equal, when we look at like market cap and the assumptions around how many miners are going to come into our system organically as a proof of work system, is that Unity improves our security by a factor of 100 to 1,000. Just on the basis of this kind of like add-on layer, essentially. That changes over time as the economic value of our ecosystem grows, because the reward obviously drives participation. So the price does matter from the perspective of security. But we think we get a lot of the benefits of like both worlds of proof of work and proof of stake without concentrating. Like a lot of the trade-offs in delegated proof of stake models are around efficiency, and we've found kind of an interesting balance to not have to trade off decentralization for efficiency to maintain kind of our Unity design.
All right, we have 19 seconds left, so I'll end with a softball. Where can people find you at the event?
Walking around. We being a nonprofit, we like to not spend our money on booths at Consensus, but thank you for having us.
We do have one zone.
I don't organize the event anymore, so I'm not going to give
no,
you a
I
hard
was
time.
saying thank you for having us to the room.
Leo, can you raise your hand? So Clemplay, one of our portfolio companies, we hang out around their zone. They're just literally at the entrance. If you guys want to make money just by playing games, that's the person to speak to.
And also, I forgot to mention, we got these really cool Run AVM stickers.
Love it.
So if you want to run AVM sticker.
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.